The night my parents called me a Navy reject and threw my bags onto the wet driveway, the only person who showed up with a porch light on was the old man everyone in town called crazy. The rain had no mercy that Tuesday. It came down in sheets, the kind that soaks through a jacket in seconds and turns a driveway into a river. I stood there, 19 years old, 2 duffel bags at my feet, watching my father's silhouette disappear behind a slammed door. The porch light clicked off, just like that, like I was nothing more than a bad memory they wanted to stop thinking about. "Get out, you lowlife," Dad had yelled, his voice cracking at the edges, not from emotion, but from the sheer force of his contempt. "You couldn't even pass the Navy physical. You're an embarrassment to this family. You're an embarrassment to this name." Mom had stood behind him, arms folded, not saying a single word in my defense. That silence hurt worse than anything he said. My name is Cole Merritt, and 3 months ago I had been accepted into the United States Navy. I was supposed to be the first Merritt man in 2 generations to serve. My grandfather had served. My father had tried and washed out, a fact he'd never admitted to anyone, but somehow transferred into an obsession with making sure I succeeded where he hadn't. He'd pushed me for years. Military academies, fitness camps, discipline, discipline, discipline. My whole life had been shaped around one destination: a uniform, a salute, a redemption arc written entirely for his benefit. But my left knee had other plans. A ligament issue the doctors found during my final physical, one I hadn't even known about, hadn't felt in any meaningful way, disqualified me quietly and efficiently. No drama, no second chances, just a letter, a handshake, and a drive home that felt like a funeral procession. Dad didn't want explanations. He didn't want medical reports. He wanted a son who could stand in a uniform, and since I couldn't give him that, he decided he didn't want a son at all. So there I was, 19, soaked to the bone, nowhere to go. I picked up both bags, wiped the rain off my face, and started walking. Grandpa Ned lived at the end of Clover Mill Road, about 2 miles from our house, in a place that most people in Hardin's Creek described as that old wreck. It was a 2-story craftsman home that had seen better decades, with a wraparound porch that sagged slightly to the left, a garden that grew whatever it wanted to grow regardless of what Ned planted, and wind chimes made entirely from old fishing lures, license plates, and once, famously, a set of dentures that weren't his. People called Ned Merritt eccentric. They said he talked to his tomatoes, argued with the weather, and once told the mayor of Hardin's Creek to his face that he had the personality of a boiled potato. He'd lived alone since Grandma Ruth passed 8 years ago, and he'd spent those 8 years doing exactly what he wanted, answering to no one, keeping hours that made no logical sense, and reading books stacked so high along his walls that the whole house looked like a library that had survived an earthquake. He was 74 years old, walked with a slight lean to the right from an old war injury, and had hands like knotted oak roots, strong, scarred, impossibly steady. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. Dad had made that difficult, cutting off what he called unnecessary sentiment. Ned had never approved of the way Dad raised me, and Dad had never forgiven Ned for saying so out loud. I knocked on his door at 10:47 at night, soaking wet, carrying everything I owned in 2 bags. The porch light came on immediately. Not after a minute, not after I knocked twice. Immediately, like he'd been waiting, like some part of him had always known I'd end up here eventually. The door opened, and there he was, Grandpa Ned, in flannel pajama pants and a faded navy sweatshirt that had to be 50 years old, squinting at me through thick-framed glasses with one lens slightly cracked. He looked at me for a long moment, looked at the bags, looked at the rain dripping off my nose. "HM," he said, "just that, HM." Then he stepped aside and held the door open wide. "I was just making chili," he said, walking back toward the kitchen like I'd simply dropped by for a visit. "You still hate onions?" "Yeah, I managed." "I already left them out," he said. "Funny how that works." I didn't explain everything right away. Ned didn't ask. He put a bowl of chili in front of me, poured himself a glass of something amber-colored that he didn't offer to share, and sat across the kitchen table with the quiet patience of a man who had learned that most things worth knowing revealed themselves eventually. We sat like that for a while. The rain hammered the windows. The fishing lure wind chimes outside clinked and clattered in the storm. A cat I didn't recognize sat on top of the refrigerator and stared at me with the specific disdain that only cats can truly master. His name's Admiral, Ned said, noticing me looking. Showed up 6 months ago, acts like he owns the place. He paused. I respect that about him. I laughed for the first time in weeks. It came out rough and a little broken, but it was real. After the chili was gone, I told him everything. The disqualification, the drive home, Dad's face, that rigid, almost relieved fury, like he'd been looking for a reason and I'd finally handed him one. Mom's silence, the bags on the driveway, the rain. Ned listened without interrupting. That was a rare gift, I realized, listening without loading your response while the other person was still talking. He just listened, his eyes steady, his hands wrapped around his glass, his expression unreadable but attentive. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father washed out of his own Navy application when he was 21. Did he ever tell you that?" I stared at him. No. Panic disorder, Ned said simply. Nothing shameful about it, but he was ashamed. He always was. He swirled his glass. He spent the last 30 years trying to fix something in himself by fixing it in you. That's not parenting, that's outsourcing. The word landed somewhere deep in my chest and just sat there, accurate and heavy. You didn't fail, Ned said. Your knee has a ligament issue. That's between you and your knee. It has nothing to do with your worth, your courage, or what kind of man you're going to be. He pointed at me with one gnarled finger. Are we clear on that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good, he stood up, took both bowls to the sink. You'll take the upstairs room. The blue one, not the green one. The green one has a draft that'll give you nightmares. Towels are in the hall closet. Don't use the ones with the anchors on them. Those are mine. He paused. You got a job. No. You got a plan. No. He nodded, unsurprised. Good starting point. We'll figure it out in the morning. Can't build anything decent at night in a rainstorm. He started turning off the kitchen lights. Oh, and coal. I looked up. I'm glad you came here, he said. Not warmly, exactly. Not with the performed sentiment of a greeting card. He said it the way you'd state a fact, plainly, directly, like something he simply wanted to be known. This house has been too quiet. I stayed. Not for a few days, not for a week, I stayed. Ned gave me the blue room, which smelled like cedar and old paperback books, and faintly of something I eventually identified as pipe tobacco from a habit he'd apparently quit 15 years ago. He had more routines than I expected: coffee at 5:30, a walk at 6 regardless of weather, reading until 9, then whatever the day demanded. He ran his life like a man who had decided that dignity was mostly about consistency. He didn't coddle me, he didn't pretend everything was fine, but he also never once treated me like a burden or a charity case. I was simply there, and being there came with expectations: contribute, think, keep moving. In the mornings, we worked on the house. Small repairs mostly, a porch board here, a window seal there. Ned knew how to do everything with his hands, and he taught without lecturing, the way good teachers always do. He'd simply start doing something and let you figure out where you could be useful. In the evenings, we talked. Not about feelings necessarily. Ned wasn't built for abstract emotional processing. We talked about things: history, the town, the war, his years in the Navy, which had been real and hard and had left marks he wore without complaint. He told me stories about Grandma Ruth. He told me about being young and afraid and finding out that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway, which he admitted was a cliché, but was still, in his experience, completely true. He never told me what to do with my life, but somewhere in those conversations, in the rhythm of working with my hands and eating dinner at a real table and waking up in a house where the porch light came on, I started to find the shape of something, a direction not borrowed from anyone else's ambitions, mine. I enrolled in a community college engineering program that fall. Ned drove me on the first day without being asked, parked the truck and said, "Merits are builders, always have been, go build something." Then he drove home and argued with his tomatoes and left the porch light on. I think about that night sometimes, the rain, the driveway, the door that closed. I don't hold it without anger. I don't pretend it didn't happen, but I've come to understand something that took time to see clearly. Some people will define your worth by what you couldn't do. And some people will hold the door open in the rain and leave the onions out of the chili before you even arrive. Grandpa Ned didn't save me with speeches or money or grand gestures. He saved me the only way that actually works, by treating me like I was already worth saving before I'd done a single thing to prove it. That's the whole story, really. That's the whole, entire thing.